The first time I really honestly saw and recognized that I needed to stop drinking alcohol, I actually had no idea what kind of consequences can happen from stopping on your own when you're that deep into it. I was probably north of a gallon of vodka a day, plus additionally, probably 3 to 4 Long Island iced teas. And I prefaced those because that was the half, what that was my lunch. So that was halfway through the daytime. That's what I had usually for lunch, 3 to 4 Long Island iced teas and a French onion soup. And that was my lunch really for quite a long time. And when I went to stop, I really didn't understand at all. I didn't know about withdrawal. I'm sure I didn't even have any clue about what was to come. And I ended up getting really sick. That's another story to tell in its own way about what happened. I did experience delirium tremens, and it lasted for 25 and a half hours, actually, is what it lasted for. But yeah, it was a very serious, life-threatening situation of delirium tremens. And I got to the other side of that and got healthy again and returned to drinking fairly quickly, if not immediately. And from that point forward, I suppose I had in my head that, okay, if I get sick enough from alcohol, well, then I can just go to this detox type of place and become healthy again, and then I'll be okay. And, my mind used that for a lot of years in terms of, I'm just going to drink until I really can't drink anymore. And when my body is failing and I can't function or do anything anymore, I'll go and get help and I'll clean up from alcohol. And then from that point forward, I'll continue to drink again. I mean, that wasn't necessarily the plan I had on paper, but that's certainly the way it happened, right? So this repeated itself, and we've talked about this before, Matt, too, like more times than I can count. If I actually sat down and wrote it out on paper, it's definitely 50 times or more that I've been like into medical facilities and detoxes and treatment centers and emergency rooms even, if you will. So let's start kind of at the beginning, say early childhood, something like this. So I have a very solid, stable family life growing up. Mom and dad, brother, and very close with aunts, uncles, and cousins, and a tight knit New Jersey family. Growing up, it was always church on Sundays, and it was family time on the weekends. So, it was for the most part, it was a single income household. Growing up, my parents were a bit older than my friends and my peers' parents and stuff. And there was, on a few occasions, been mistaken to be my grandparents, even, if you will. Probably right around maybe 20 years older on average than the typical parent that age. I want to say they were in their mid 40s when they had my brother and myself, and my brothers and I are even very close in age too, in terms of we're 5 days shy of a year between us. So, and back east anyway, they call that Irish twins, something like that, where we're so close together. And my parents, they met later in life. They hit it off really quickly. They got married really quickly and had a family. Pretty quickly. And my dad was a golf pro at the time, and he was to be believe he was the head instructor for what was called at that time the Maplewood Country Club out in Maplewood, New Jersey. And quite frequently, from my understanding, he was traveling quite a bit from New Jersey to Florida for tournaments quite often. And then after they were married, it kind of was too much traveling. So he looked to be for a different career. So he went into the sales end, and became a salesman and golf equipment and things like that. But as a young child, I don't really have a memory very much of my dad traveling like that. I think it was probably before I had those memories being, I guess those formidable years when maybe, I don't know, maybe two, something like that. Maybe you'd start remembering things like that. And I don't have any specific memories of him traveling like that, but I do recall a good work ethic. He was always working, but he always spent time with the family. And Sundays was, like I said, church and family, seeing our aunts and uncles. And it was later on in life I realized, oh, that's my dad's brother. Oh, that's my dad's sister. Things like that. When I was maybe 7 or 8, then I started realizing those things. And growing up in our house, so it was my mom and my dad and myself and my brother, and we always had pets around. We usually had a cat and dog that got along really super well. So it was a very typical stable family in the sense of there was no abuse, there was no situations where I felt uncomfortable. I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, and ended up spending about 30 years there, a little over 30 years before I started moving to different areas. And I'll get to that a little bit later, doing some geographical changes across the country. And only later to find out, of course, wherever you go, there you are. Let's say typically if I was, we'll go to around like age 7 or 8. My dad got real sick, and at that time, the surgeries that he needed were really life-threatening type of situations for ulcers, and he had, I think, most of like 3/4 of his stomach removed. So he was actually like not physically capable of being able to work. He couldn't work for a while. Prior to that, I should preface too, like I do have memories of maybe 5, 6, 7 years old of him taking me to work with him. He worked at that time in a sales position in one of the retail outlets in the lower level of the World Trade Center. So that's where I started first becoming aware of like Manhattan and New York City. And, that plays a role in my life later too as well, for nightlife and things like that. But as a young child, I have nothing but great memories of going to New York City and Manhattan and stuff like that, and going to the World Trade Centers with my dad, on Saturday mornings for work and things like that. But when my dad got sick, they had financial trouble in the house, of not being out of work that long. They ended up losing their house. And probably, I was real young, so I don't really know the specifics of it, but I'm sure, probably borrowing some money from family and stuff like that. And so we ended up, in my mind, probably having a little bit of financial insecurity at that time, or as much as you can recognize at that age anyway. And moved to a different area in Jersey City and still went to school, which is what I was talking about, I think a little, maybe off camera a little earlier, about being like in an out of school district, but still going to, to the school that I went to since I was in first grade, and some of my friends I've known even since kindergarten, go back a really long way. And I did really well throughout the school, meaning K through 8, and did exceptionally well, I think. I was in what they call the G&T program. I think that just stands for gifted and talented. I don't know what their standards were that they measured that with. I don't really recall, but I do know that it was some type of accelerated program in some way. So I always had straight A's. I always had, to the best I could, I know perfect attendance was very important to me. And that was pretty much up through 8th grade. And it was very typical, all straight A's, a lot of studying, stability, certainly with family and friends and everything, and planning on to go to a certain high school. It's called Hudson Catholic High School out in Jersey City, over on Kennedy Boulevard. My brother had got his freshman year there, and with the turn of events, the way it turned out is we actually ended up moving. So we moved to a town called Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey, and with very little notice, almost none. Now I'm in a new town, and I didn't gravitate to the real suburban type of New Jersey very well. I was very much a Jersey City guy, Jersey City kid at that time, at 14 years old. So I did spend quite a bit of time returning back to Jersey City, hanging out with my friends there. And later on, that segued, when I was about 16 years old, that segued to starting to, get into that area of partying, if you will. A lot of drinking going on, and taking some types of like mescaline and things like that. Never any consequences. This is a time when you're 16, 17 years old where you can stay out drinking all night and playing in a rock band with your friends and then get up for work the next day, or actually still be up. You're not even necessarily going to bed or anything like that. Could be up for days at a time. And so there was no negative consequence. If anything, it was fun at the time. And, that kind of segued, for one thing led to another. And then I started getting into some hard drugs when I was right around 18 years old. And then that segued into some legal trouble that was pretty quite serious at the time. And I decided to remove myself from that situation, in terms of that's not the lifestyle I want to use. I don't want to live. I'd rather live. I don't want to live a lifestyle where I'm just constantly around alcohol and drugs, and it's getting me nowhere, kind of thing. And now I've got some legal consequences to deal with, which I did successfully. And I decided to change my life and start looking at a career, rather than just trying to go after a musical dream, if you will, that the chances of getting that to happen are just as likely as if I go buy a Powerball ticket. Rock bands are everywhere, and I mean, I still play a little bit today just for myself, for personal enjoyment. Music is something that's always been a very important part of my life, from my earliest memories all the way through now. And it always will be. But I wasn't looking to pursue that anymore. That was more of a teen angst type of rebellion, if you will, not like I was wanting to or trying to be like the bad guy, but that's kind of how it ended up segueing to, especially when the harder drugs came around. And actually, I know exactly when I stopped doing all that. That was New Year's Eve, so that was December 31st, 1992. And I haven't done any of that since then. So this New Year's here coming up here would legitimately be about, I think if I did the math correctly, that's like 32 years. I didn't do any program or anything like that. I made that decision on the spot to not touch these things hard or these hard things anymore. And I didn't, and I haven't done since then. However, in retrospect, that probably, thinking about it now, probably left that door open, meaning alcohol, which took a really, really long time. It's really slow. It's really insidious how it seeps into your life. And it's many decades for myself. And I know a lot of people like that too, where it wasn't an overnight thing. It took a really long time to actually start receiving consequences for it. It took a really long time to start becoming physically addicted to it, mentally addicted to it. So it kind of stands to reason now, thinking back on it, that it didn't happen overnight to get into it that deeply. So thinking about that from a realistic point of view now, as I'm thinking about this now, as I'm telling you this, it doesn't seem to me like it would be that quick to get out. It seems like, my path to get out was probably the same as getting in. It took a while for it to happen. It took a while for it to get out of it. Let's fast forward a little bit to when alcohol started becoming a driving force in my life, where it was just there all the time. It started out with happy hours, if you will, working a 9 to 5 where you're wearing a suit and tie every day and going to the office and, responsible to be like a production manager running a print company in New Jersey and even Long Island, New York, and Queens, New York. And I kind of made my way around. I made a really good name for myself in print production and management and did well with it. And there was a time where I probably envisioned that that's what I would be doing for the rest of my life moving forward. And alcohol really just at that point was just becoming more and more important, if you will, in my life. So happy hours became liquid lunches, became replaced really my morning coffee. And to the point where that's all it was. There was a period of time where the alcohol was the only liquid I was drinking. I'm sure I went, well, quite a long time without anything else other, than alcohol, probably, and no water and things like that. Didn't realize it at the time, but I'm thinking back on it now, and I'm certain that there was many times when it was like that. And the first time I really honestly saw and recognized that I needed to stop drinking alcohol, I actually had no idea what kind of consequences can happen from stopping on your own when you're that deep into it. I was probably north of a gallon of vodka a day, plus additionally probably 3 to 4 Long Island iced teas. And I prefaced those because that was the that was my lunch. So that was halfway through the daytime. That's what I had usually for lunch, 3 to 4 Long Island iced teas and a French onion soup. And that was my lunch really for quite a long time. And when I went to stop, I really didn't understand at all. I didn't know about withdrawal. I'm sure I didn't even have any clue about what was to come. And I ended up getting really sick. That's another story to tell in its own way about what happened. I did experience delirium tremens, and it lasted for 25 and a half hours, actually, is what it lasted for. But yeah, it was a very serious, life-threatening situation of delirium tremens. And I got to the other side of that and got healthy again and returned to drinking fairly quickly, if not immediately. And from that point forward, I suppose I had in my head that, okay, if I get sick enough from alcohol, well, then I can just go to this detox type of place and become healthy again, and then I'll be okay. And, my mind used that for a lot of years in terms of, I'm just going to drink until I really can't drink anymore. And when my body is failing and I can't function or do anything anymore, I'll go and get help and I'll clean up from alcohol. And then from that point forward, I'll continue to drink again. I mean, that wasn't necessarily the plan I had on paper, but that's certainly the way it happened, right? So this repeated itself. And we've talked about this before, Matt, too, like more times than I can count. If I actually sat down and wrote it out on paper, it's definitely 50 times or more that I've been like into medical facilities and detoxes and treatment centers and emergency rooms, even, if you will, for 6 hours, 8 hours, 2 hours at a clip, whatever that looked like at the time. And that was a cycle that repeated itself, let's see, from 2009 through 2023, even. So this was last year, right? And I think the last time when I got sober in January, and I use that word, sober is a very light word. To me, that's just scratching the surface. So I'll try to keep saying when I quit drinking alcohol, because for myself today, being sober, that's just the start. That's really 1%. What about the other 99? And that's what I do today is I really do live a full life and not obsess about something I used to do and not dwell in morbid reflection on that like I had for a very, very long time through, different 12-step programs I was, a part of during certain periods of my life. But I did give at some point in time, there was a concerted effort, Matt, where I wanted to stop drinking and I wanted to find a life on the other side of alcohol. And that's really when I made that transition from recognizing that there, is a problem to the degree of I need to make a life change in some way that's dramatic enough to where I'm not going to drink alcohol anymore. I just remember there being, I think, in the AA program, if you will, I do remember specific feeling of like, wow, I'm going to be doing this forever. Apparently, I'm going to be sitting around these dark rooms and kind of sitting in morbid reflection. And it was really not an appealing thing to me for quite a long time. And then honestly, it never really was. It never ended up to be that way anyway. And there's many people, you and I have had this conversation before. There's many people that have had success with that, with a specifically and strictly a 12-step program, a 12-step modality. That didn't work for me. So I was doing something that inherently in the program, they say, in the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, that's kind of what I was doing with the 12-step program in and of itself. I was continuing to return and do it the same way over and over again, expecting a different result. And it was never going to end up changing inherently who it is that I am, no matter what. And who it is that I am is definitely more than just sitting around and talking about morbid reflection. And I don't really care for war stories. I didn't have much success in that, in a sense where even at its best, when I was going to meetings and going and working with a sponsor, doing step work, and it never felt quite right. I always felt like that square peg in a round hole, if you will. Ultimately, what it was is honestly, I just needed something different. I need something more holistic, more complete and total. I was going to these 12-step AA meetings up until probably about 2 years ago. And it was July of 2023. And I really was at that point where I remember there was one day in specific where I was in pretty deep thought and meditation. And I was looking for answers, and I wanted something more. And I just feel like I was definitely guided. I believe in God my whole life, and that's something that's inherently always been with me. And I feel like I was guided. I really do to start seeking out and searching. And I did immediately with some internet searches, some fit recovery searches is what I found. I found fit recovery actually on YouTube. And came across Chris Scott's intro videos where he was kind of talking about himself, talking about how he came across, this idea of biochemical optimization for alcohol recovery. And I was immediately just enamored with that idea. And I just started watching all these videos. I found immediately right away as well, the Elevation Recovery podcast. And probably there's a few hundred episodes, I think, Matt, is about 300 episodes. And I'm certain I've heard, if not all of them, at least most of them. And I adopted that pretty quickly and immediately started getting into the nutritional factor of it, that biochemical optimization part where I'm looking at vitamins and supplements. And instead of, sitting down and just reading that same paragraph over and over again, or, 3 pages every morning and every night for the rest of my life, I was now learning something new. I was learning about what it is that makes up my optimum self in terms of that biochemical aspect, that biochemical factor, what it is that I damaged and what needs to be repaired. And I never took any classes specifically, but I certainly watched as many videos as I could. I participated in a lot of those discussion forums, and I found ultimately that the modality of the fit recovery, if you will, the biopsychosocial and spiritual aspects of it, that works for me, and it's something I never had to try that hard at all. It just came naturally. And I was no longer that, square peg in a round hole. Everything just fit right from the beginning, and it's only been getting better ever since. And that was the beginning, because from that point forward is when I actually started incorporating so many different things into my life and as part of my life, in recovery, if you will, through fit recovery, through elevation recovery. I learned this to become actually recovery capital. And it made sense for me. And it's something I continue to use today. And what that means for me is I have a lot of sets of resources that I use separately and together as part of my life. I don't consider it to be a program that I work because it's just something that's part of my life. It's like breathing. It's things that I just have in my life. From a completely sober home, Marla's sober too, of course. There was no alcohol in our home. There's nothing illicit whatsoever. We moved into our new place here in March. Our new home has absolutely no reference points whatsoever to that darkness. Only light and only good. And wow, there's so many things that I do use today as part of recovery capital, from anything from a primary care physician. One thing usually leads to the next, and I should say that too. So, meaning if I have my primary care doctor, which I, am doing the right thing by it to begin with, meaning I'm going for my annual checkups, I'm going for my lab work, I'm going for my physicals. Now I have my contact point for specialists when something else has to get looked at. Most recently, my sleep. I've been an insomniac for my whole life, probably. And so now that's something I'm addressing. So I've been set up with a sleep specialist, and I have a sleep doctor that I've been working with. I just completed a sleep study, and I've got some follow up on that in January, and that'll be one of those to be determined things moving forward. Let's see what happens. I've got some follow up consultations as well to review the results of that study, and see if there's anything else required of me on that part. And if not, then we could start talking about that solution. And that's kind of where I'm at today too. Matt, I live in the solution. So, and it's not necessarily that I don't have problems. I don't view them as problems. I view them as challenges that I'll have solutions for, period. And I'm able to have that in my life today that way, from that perspective, from so many different reasons. And again, these reasons are all little pieces of my recovery capital. Anything from, wow, like the dynamic of Marla and I's relationship together. What we share, what we've been through, where we are today, and where we're continuing to move forward and go to. That bond is unbreakable, and it's only gets stronger. And that's our home. So we have a sober home, we have a sober relationship. And again, that word sober is just scratching the surface of what's really going on, in terms of living a life of excellence, which is what I do today. And everything I do, anything and everything I do, I just try to live a life of excellence, put my best foot forward and suit up and show up for life. I don't pick and choose what it is that I'm going to do a good job with today and give 110% with, because I do it with everything. No matter what it is that I'm doing, I incorporate that spirit of excellence into it. And it's something I learned a very long time ago in business, and through that Six Sigma type of modality, again, if you will, or that set of quality standards that I actually apply to my life from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep. And not everything's perfect, very little is, but I have solutions for challenges. I don't have a situation where I have problems with no answers. That doesn't exist in my life anymore today. If we take a look at the biopsychosocial and spiritual models, right? Within each of those, there's pieces that you can have of recovery capital, depending upon which one that it is. It could be anything from nutrients, I worked with a nutritionist, for example. I worked with a nutritionist at the beginning of my recovery journey in January on a monthly basis for the first 6 months. Then I took the preceding 5 months off from meeting with her. Now I just started again on December 1st, Sunday, December 1st. I had my first meeting again. I had another one today on December 15th. So I continue to do that every 2 weeks. So bi-weekly, I'll meet, half an hour to an hour to go over nutrition and to learn about what does my A1C mean? What is HDL? What is LDL? Well, I know these things today. And now I'm learning how to incorporate them into my life so I can optimize them. So most of the things that I have in terms of my lab work, for my blood are in range. Most of them are. And now I'm at the point where I can look to optimize them as well. No matter what it is I'm doing, I want to be in a situation where I'm optimizing that. I don't want to have an attitude anymore of, that's good enough. No, not really. Not at all, actually. That's not good enough at all. So that's why I said earlier is when I have that approach and that perspective of I'm going to put 110% into everything that it is that I do, everything. Marla and I have these conversations quite frequently too, where we talk about the relationships that we have in our life today, and they're meaningful. If we start a new relationship with somebody, it has to be of value. And I'm not speaking financial value. I'm talking about a value that's rooted in excellence. no longer is there a spirit, if you will, of mediocrity in our lives whatsoever. There's no room for it, and it simply just doesn't exist any longer. Alcohol, they call spirits in a way. I've heard that referenced a few times in my life. So that in and of itself could be a spirit of mediocrity, and that's not in our life anymore. So what is in our life today is that spirit of excellence in like everything that I do, everything that Marla does, and everything that we do together. And coming from that perspective, life is great. It really is. It's not a chore today. I used to, when I was drinking alcohol, I really didn't want to see the sunrise. I was really upset when I saw 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning come around and it starts to get light outside. And I really didn't enjoy that very much because I knew I had to face that day. I had to somehow get to work. I had to somehow function. When none of that really mattered, what mattered was the alcohol. Those things were kind of in the way of it. And today it's not only the opposite, it's really that entire element's been removed from my life. So today is really just a matter of, hey, how much are we going to accomplish? But whatever that is, we're going to have a lot of fun doing it. And I do. I really enjoy my life today. I love my job. I love my home life. I love my family. I love my friends. Recently starting a new business here that we can maybe talk about on a future episode. And there's today, living from that perspective, it is really, honestly, it's a brand new life. It really is. And I'm really excited to continue to move forward constantly and consistently with dedication and honestly, see how far I can go, see how great life can get. And it's come this far already in a year, and it's going to continue to grow and get better. And hopefully other people will be able to maybe connect with that understanding in some way and maybe look into that for themselves. If they're in a situation where they've tried a lot of things in the past, they've been to rehab and they've been to 12 step and they've been to maybe life ring, maybe they've been to smart recovery or celebration recovery, and none of that worked. Well, maybe try something different. Maybe try fit recovery. Maybe try the idea of biopsychosocial and spiritual recovery and progress and see if that works. It worked for me, worked for you, worked for Scott. And that's my hope, that message will get out there where there is no monopoly on recovery. Whatever works for you is going to work. More power to you. God bless you, and keep going with it. That's how I view it, in my opinion. If it works, great. As long as you're not hurting anybody. If you're improving the quality of your life and those around you, keep going with it. If that means 12 step, great. If that means fit recovery, great. And coming from that perspective, I give respect to where respect is due. And all of these programs deserve respect. From the program of Alcoholics Anonymous specifically, I gravitate to the principles behind those 12 steps, which for me come directly out of the Bible, which could be an acronym for the basic instructions before leaving Earth. So that's something I've connected with my whole life. And having said that, today I can live a life inherently of empathy rather than sympathy. So to me, empathy fuels connection. Anybody can be sympathetic to a cause or a situation or a need, but empathy is not only, I know what you're talking about, it's, yeah, I know what you're talking about because I've been there. Yeah. And that's empathy. Sympathy is just, oh yeah, I hear you. And that kind of fuels disconnection. But the life I live today is an empathetic one, not sympathetic. And that's growth that I've come a long way with. Living the life of an active drinker is very selfish life. It's inherently lonely. And you want anyone and everyone in the world to be sympathetic for you. And this life that I live today is the opposite of that. So prior to knowing about biochemical optimization, and that's just the start of it too, because that's just the bio part. Then we have the psychological, the social, and the spiritual aspects as well. So prior to this, it was only 12 step, really. I mean, I looked a little bit into smart recovery. I looked a little bit into life ring, a little bit into celebration recovery. I did see a lot of common ground that I gravitated to in terms of the God aspect. That is something that I did definitely gravitate to. And even in hindsight, see that as that's a constant connection that I do have with that. But absolutely, there's been times in our life throughout the last decade where we haven't had a place to live. Here in Arizona, if you don't have You're considered to be legally homeless if you don't have your own residence. So if you're part of a sober living program, if you will, you're considered legally homeless. And there were certainly times where we were in neither, meaning we didn't have our own place. We weren't in a recovery program. So that left us pretty much for a period of time of living in hotels, really, until we were kicked out, that is, and then on to the next, and so on and so forth. We did it for a period of time. I think it was about 3 months, about 9 years ago. Yeah, about 9 years ago, for 3 months or so, we lived out in California in Sacramento with my father-in-law. We stayed out by him because we really didn't have anywhere to go. And, our mission in that time really, honestly, was to just drink. And situations led about to where we ended up back in Arizona and started hearing about sober living and the idea of living an alcohol-free life. But the thing with that is it could potentially be a never-ending circuit, meaning you're just kind of continuing to go in and out. And now the only difference is you have a place to go to when things get really bad. You can go back to these sober living facilities. And these sober living facilities at some points in time have saved our life, because we did have a safe place to go to. It is rare for a couple together to be successful in recovery, and that's a dynamic that Marla and I have had. And it's a big portion of the reason for our success in a life of recovery and living an alcohol-free life. We have that dynamic 24/7, meaning our home's sober. Like I've mentioned before, there is no reference points to anything like that inside of our home where we live. And it's not part of our world in any way anymore. But at one point in time, on the other side of that coin, it absolutely was, because as good as we are together, right? Let me say it that way. As good as we are together, we could be just as bad with alcohol involved. So the life that we live today is the opposite in every way that we were living before. With the existence of sober living facilities, that is something in and of itself that is a dimension that if you do use, there's a right way and a wrong way to use it. And for many years, we used the wrong way, which was we continued to use it as a revolving door. When things get bad enough, you don't want to live on the streets, go ahead and go into a sober living program and be sober, if you will, meaning appear to be sober. I don't think quite often we were not sober in these programs. There was a period of time where Marla and I were managing a sober living facility and responsible for breathalyzing and drug testing the house. And then in the evening times, we drank until it's time to pass out. So we were drinking quite frequently as managers in a sober living program. So just because you're in that program, it's not going to keep you sober. It's really not. I think that these programs save people's lives. And there's a right way to use them and a wrong way to use them. And for us, in the beginning, we were not using them the correct way. And even with detox facilities and treatment centers, there's a right way to use them and a wrong way to use them. And for the majority of my experience has been the wrong way. They're not supposed to be used as a Band-Aid. They're really not. You can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound as a saying. And that's kind of what happens when someone tries to continually be in a cycle where they're just drinking themselves into a situation where they need medical assistance, getting that medical assistance, and then going right back out and doing the same thing again. And that's the way I lived for a really long time. When I quit drinking, when I decided to live an alcohol-free life, January 11th of this year of 2024 is when I officially, you can say, started living my alcohol-free life. I didn't go to a treatment center and I didn't go to a detox facility. I did it at home. And I did it, with myself, and Marla was there, of course, and, something we watched each other on. And I had to actually be in work, back into the office, actually, in 4 days. I believe it was Monday, January 15th. I had to be in my employer's office and work in person rather than remotely for that week. So I did. I was in a situation where I had to suit up and show up, and so was Marla. And we did. And we've been doing that ever since. And a lot of times in the past, I've gone to these, even over the course of years, of course, I've gone to some very expensive and some really nice treatment centers, and I've gone to some really bad ones and everywhere in between. But what ultimately got me to where I needed to be was inside of me all along. It was myself. It wasn't if I was going to take an Uber to a facility, if it wasn't a limo was going to pick me up, like what happened one time out in Florida. Real nice detox facility out there, by the way, called Palm Partners. I was there about 14, 15 years ago, and I thought that was going to get me sober. That was going to change my life. None of those things ultimately worked, and what worked was the idea of understanding that I'm in charge of my own life. There's nobody coming to save John. There's nobody coming to save Marla. There's nobody coming to pay our bills, to take care of our home, to do our jobs for us. That's on us. So there does come a point where we had to make that decision to suit up and show up for our own life and understand that it's on us. So with that understanding, I was able to go into, as I mentioned before, some deep thought and prayer and meditation about what's next. What do I need to do? And that's what led me to Fit Recovery. That's what led me to Elevation Recovery. And that's what led me to the biopsychosocial spiritual modules of recovery. That's what led me to Recovery Capital. And that's what led me to what I do today, which is I live an intentional life. There's a radio show out here called Family Life Radio. And one of the hosts is Dr. Randy Carlton. And he'll talk quite frequently about intentional living and what that means. And I incorporate that into my life in the sense that everything I do has a purpose. Everything I do has a meaning. And living an alcohol-free life is part of that intention. I intentionally do these things in my life. And by not picking and choosing about where I'm going to do a good job, and just by doing the best I can everywhere, that's intentional. And by having this inherently in me, it's not a program I have to go to. It's not a meeting I have to show up for. It's just who I am. And I get to live that today. And that's the reason I continue to do it and live this way. I take a lot of time with self-care, probably an hour in the beginning of the day at least, and an hour at the end. That hour in the beginning of the day is to ramp up and get ready for that day. The hour at night or more is to ramp that down. Downshift, if you will, get into more of a meditative, quiet state and reflective and preparation, really, too, prepare for the next day, things like that. It's not only about doing certain things, it's also about the timing. I want to do the right thing at the right time. I don't want to listen to one of my motivational videos at 1 a.m. And I don't want to listen to a certain type of sleep program or take an Epsom salt bath or do something with melatonin at 5 a.m. They have to be the right thing at the right time. So that's something I've incorporated as well to make what I'm doing appropriate for the time that I'm doing it. That's intentional as well. Like was what I was getting at before. Everything that I do is intentional. There's meaning behind it and there's purpose, and that meaning and that purpose is one of positive nature today. So that is where I am at. Think about it like this. You have somebody that's addicted to a substance, right? In my scenario, it was alcohol. So that person, to continue to live that way, has to have and adopt a personality of selfishness and self-centered behavior so that lifestyle can continue. And it's not something that you do really intentionally, I should say, right? Like you don't want to do this, but this part of a personality is developed over the course of decades from continued substance abuse, and we're continuing to do that type of damage to our brains. We're continuing to burn negative neural pathways rather than positive or even just neutral, okay? So that lifestyle, to continue that way, has to be all about that person. Now, add a second person to that, exactly like you. So what's going to happen? The worst of the worst is going to happen. This person's going to want to have their addiction survive. This person's going to want to have this addiction survive for them. And at the same time, for us anyway, in our situation, we had this unique bond where we actually cared and loved and like each other. So that made it really difficult. But at the same time, once we got to the other side and experienced the life of recovery, it made everything really easy. We were talking about this earlier, the motivational speaker Les Brown, where he says, one of his talks, he talks about if you do what is easy, your life will be hard. But if you do what is hard, your life will be easy. So that's essentially the way we were living. We were doing what was easy and our life was hard. Today we do what is hard and our life is easy, meaning our life together, how we synergize together. Today we have a very full life. We travel to see our family and friends. We're always involved with work in the sense where we don't just, I heard somebody say something like this recently. We don't just go in, we don't have 9-to-5 jobs where we get in there at 9:30 and leave at 4. If we have 9-to-5 jobs, we're those people now that get in there at 8. We get in there early and we leave late. And at the same time, we have a balance to where we have a full life. We really do. We have a very full, rich, fulfilling life. and we have support of each other. We have that inherent bond of what it is that we've been through. We've already been through that time of life where most people don't get through it. Most couples don't. To speak about this from a dynamic of two people together now, from a couple's point of view, is definitely different. And that's a dynamic that's in and of itself is unique in the sense that, well, most people are kind of on their addictions alone. And the segment of the population that is addicted to whatever it is that substance is, whether it's one or many, usually if there's another person involved, that ends real quickly. And if it doesn't, it does eventually within that period of active addiction. And ours didn't. It actually only grew stronger, our bond. So as our addictions were becoming less prevalent in our life, there was a time when little by little, our bond, our relationship was getting stronger as the addiction was becoming weaker. And I really do believe that ours is a story of that love being stronger than addiction. I really do. I believe that in my heart. And I wouldn't be where it is I am today in life, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, without Marla. We have that bond together that's irreplaceable. We're that cosmically unique puzzle of where we are each other's missing pieces that work. And that's probably the plan of the universe all along. And we have that in our life today.
The way that I got sober is a little bit different than John's. He got sober at home, and I had no intention of quitting drinking. I had resigned myself to the fact that I had lost my job, and the opportunity just wasn't there for me anymore. And John had kind of taken over and got me on an extended leave at my work and put me on short-term disability. So I was still receiving a paycheck and living in my addiction. And during that time that he was getting sober, he had to go back to work. He spent a week in the office. I stayed at home drinking. And when that week was over, he set it all up to put me in really nice, very high-end detox where I could vape. And that seemed to be, for me, the breaking point of going to detox was, no, I'm not going to be able to vape, or, what a stupid thing, but it was a deciding factor for me. So he found this place where I could go that I could vape, and I went there and they helped me and they weaned me off of alcohol. They gave me Ativan to wean me down, and I stayed there for a week, and I've been alcohol free ever since. And so I came home. I took another week off work to kind of get settled in after that, and then I was back to the grind, and I've been doing wonderful at work ever since. I'm praised for my work now. My boss has said out loud the tremendous amount of growth that he's seen in me in the past year. I'm asked to do special projects. I'm working with new hires. I'm used to set examples for certain things at work. So my investment in my job is truly paying off. So I had to work consistently and very, very hard where other people are just doing their job. I'm working extra and I'm working overtime and I'm working extra overtime so that I can prove myself as a good employee again, because for so long I was unreliable and a very poor example. So I've built that back up now, and I'm in a great place with my employment, and I'm in a great place in life. I'm in a great place with my relationship with John, and every day just keeps getting better and better. And I look forward to every day to see what it brings, and it always brings something wonderful. So it's pretty amazing life to watch unfold every day. So I'm just glad to be a part of it. I think, the best way to explain it is that, for the last 15, let's say 15 years that I've known John, I've always known his potential. And I've always known that through our darkest times, the deepest down, how far we've gone, I've always known his potential. And today he reaches it. And my goal, my wish for him has finally come true. He is finally reaching those milestones and reaching those levels of excellence and those levels of perfection that I knew he could achieve, that I stuck around for, knowing that he would achieve those and be my partner in life. And it was hard to watch, I mean, there were times I called the cops on him and they arrested me. And so where normal people build a foundation, we've had to heal. Normal people start here, we started down here. So not only have we built the normal foundation where people have, we built it from down here. So we didn't start at normal. We started down here and we grew from normal. So we're working with a foundation that's 50 times as deep as two normal people. We've gone through more than anyone that I've ever met, any couple I've ever met.
Yeah.
And I think that we represent a segment of the population that is vastly unserved. And there are couples out there that are separated for detox, they are separated for treatment, they are separated and told to work on themselves when they are tied at the soul, just like John and I are. And I'm not okay if he's not okay. He's not okay if I'm not okay. So separating us is the absolute worst thing to do. And separating those couples is the absolute worst thing to do. And, my goal, my personal and professional goal is to change that for those couples so that, maybe they can start healing at a level that's not, that maybe they don't have to go as deep as we had to go. Couples who come through recovery like we did are more prone to that than just the average couple. And, I think that having that addiction behind you adds an additional fuel to your fire to be able to find the meaning of life and what is the meaning of your life and multiply that into something tangible and how you can help other people. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's, we're excited about it every day, and we have, new ideas every day on how we can launch this and begin to help people on a daily basis. And our focus changes, and our lives are pretty static these days, but our focus changes on a daily basis. And it's fueled by love. At the end of the day, it's fueled by love, willingness, and a deep passion for helping other people. And I see us going very far places and in pursuit of fulfilling our dreams. So